Buraigun Galaxy Storm lacks any modern bells and whistles, and at times it can feel, in fact it just is, more than a little rough around the edges. However, somehow taken as a whole, it still has a vibe to it that makes me want to like it, despite its rather glaring issues. Originally released for PC a few years back, this is unmistakably a doujin effort, and in fact was originally a doujin hentai game. I suspect actually that this was probably developed first and foremost as a hentai game that just happened to use shmup gameplay as its vehicle, as opposed to being first and foremost a shmup, which then had some pervy scenes added. Anyway, this Switch version has of course been cleaned up for more general consumption, but back when it first released it was called Goubakuran Rumble Storm, and you can go check out its DL site page if you're interested, but be warned, this is not something cheekily lewd like Waifu Uncovered. It's proper hentai of the sort that can get pretty ugly, and yeah, just really beware. So starting the game, you have an option of either arcade or story mode. Story mode has cutscenes at the start, end and between stages, but these cutscenes were the hentai parts of the original release, and so are mostly absent here, meaning the main difference between the modes is just that arcade mode doesn't play the full opening cinematic. The story, in case you are interested, revolves around a female pilot, the only playable character available, setting off to rescue her scientist girlfriend who's been kidnapped by some sort of robotic alien menace. The pilot's ship is, in this version, powered by being connected to her mind and feeding off her mental state. In the original, the ship was connected somewhere else and fed off. Like I said, if you want to know, you can look it up. What it translates to in terms of actual gameplay is that getting close to bullets heightens your pilot's mental state, making your weapons briefly more powerful. Grazing bullets also causes a brief time slowdown, but instead of being particularly helpful, this ends up often giving the game a really awkward lurching feeling that I never got used to. In fact, I ended up just ignoring this graze mechanic as much as possible, as it seemed to do more harm than good to your chances. Now, aside from grazing, there are quite a lot of other things going on. You'll probably have already noticed your two Truxton style Sidepods. These are present from the start and you can neither lose nor add to them. They do have 3 different shot types which can be changed with the blue, red and yellow pickups that float about, and can also be powered up with the P power-ups. These, by the way, cycle between P and S, with the S increasing your speed. Your Sidepods only actually have 3 power levels, but you can raise them up to level 9 on the display, and this is because taking a hit drops them 1 level, and losing a life drops them 3 levels, so if you keep collecting power-ups you can give yourself a bit of a safety net. On the topic of lives, you have 3, but you can take 3 hits per life, meaning you can take 9 hits before a game over, and that's before you take relatively easy to hit extends into account. Interestingly, at the end of stages on easy, your 3 hits will be restored, making the game really rather generous in that regard. Continues are also granted through play, with the end of each stage adding another to your stock. A move that's at once both lenient, but not quite as much as a pushover as just granting infinite continues from the start. One other floating pickup you'll come across is the bomb pickup, and bombs come in 2 different forms depending on what you're doing with your Sidepods. Your Sidepods, you see, can actually be repositioned to be either in front or on each side of your ship by releasing fire and moving either forward or back. Bombing when the pods are either side of you drops a classic big eruption, while bombing when the pods are in front of you unleashes a giant wide flame beam. Both of these will destroy enemy bullets in their vicinity, and further to this, the position of your pods affects your speed, with the front position slowing you down and the side position speeding you up. I did find the bomb button seemed to occasionally not register, which, as you can imagine, can be a pretty major problem when it happens. There's also one more pickup, and this is a stationary golden P pickup which gives you points. The amount depends on how many you've picked up in that stage. Each stage has, I believe, 15 of these points icons, and the first one is worth 1,000, the second 2,000, and so on up to 15,000. Scores in this game are not in the billions and trillions either, so those numbers are really worth something. In a little twist, these points pickups are hidden around each stage and are only revealed when hit with your shot. Hit them with your wide shot, however, and they will simply flash, and you won't be able to actually collect them. For that, you need to hit them with your front formation to make them appear more solidly, and there's a bit of strategy to spreading your shot widely to find where the points are, and then targeting them with your front shot to actually grab them. All the while, of course, in the middle of the regular raging battlefield. There's also very occasionally a second friendly ship that appears to help you out. To be honest, I haven't really worked out quite what triggers it, but yeah, it randomly appears from time to time. So that is quite a lot to have going on, but despite all of that, Buraigun is still very easy to get into and everything comes together perfectly intuitively. The switching between the two formations is a nice little mechanic, and collecting the gold point icons provides a good bit of differentiation between playing for survival or playing for score. The game will see you inundated with a lot of bullets, but it's more the manic style of a Toaplan game rather than full-on bullet hell. The bullets and lasers can be fast too, and not just that, a lot of enemies will fire from deep down in the bottom half of the screen, making for a very rough ride indeed and a somewhat uneven difficulty. There are quite a lot of different enemy types, although they do repeat through later stages. Boss encounters, on the other hand, are more varied in terms of both designs and the patterns you'll be facing. The visuals and music, I would say, are the game's strongest point. The soundtrack is probably worth the price of admission alone, although some of the sound effects are fairly weak, and some of the voice acting sounds like it's been phoned in, by which I don't mean that the voice actors haven't put any effort in. I literally mean that it sounds like it's been recorded from like a 90s tape deck answering machine. The visuals, while not being the crispest or cleanest around, do have a chunky mechanical nature that will, I'm sure, deliver a nostalgic hit to a lot of players, and this is a game that very much wears its arcade influences on its sleeve, and imitates those influences really well while still imbuing everything with its own distinct character. A bit more variation in the stage backgrounds might have been nice, but overall, in terms of surface looks, and especially the soundtrack, I expect this game to be able to win a lot of people over through this alone. There's also one very unusual little set piece towards the end that I won't spoil for you here, but it kinda sums the game up in that it's both kinda cool on the surface, but terribly janky at the same time in practice. And talking of jank, I already mentioned the rather juddery nature of the graze mechanics effect, but this is worsened by some really pretty poor performance on a technical level. The game actually includes a frame rate counter in the bottom left of the screen, which is very honest to have left in given that it does not make for particularly flattering reading. But to be honest, even without those performance issues, I suspect this would still feel pretty awkward to play anyway. It's hard for me to say because I've only played the Switch version, but I get the feeling this probably isn't the smoothest experience regardless of platform. There are also literally no options whatsoever, and that means no tate mode, which could have been done quite easily by simply cutting out the animation of the pilot. It also means you are stuck with the game's rather unintuitive reversed use of the A and B buttons, not just in-game, but when navigating the menus too. There isn't even a local leaderboard, although the game does record your high score and show it during play, and has a section for other statistics like number of enemies killed, etc. On the other hand, there is a practice mode and a boss rush that lets you start from any stage, and a gallery of unlockable pictures, but most of these seem to just be screenshots rather than anything very interesting. Now Buraigun is, like I said at the start, very much your prototypical doujin effort. You expect these things to be rough around the edges, and what you don't really expect is to see them released on Switch. And I think it is cool that this has received a console release, and I am prepared to cut it a bit of slack with that in mind. However, there is no denying that the performance issues, the jerky graze mechanic, and the total absence of any options at all are going to seriously affect the enjoyment for a lot of people. I feel like Buraigun is maybe a kind of 7 out of 10 game, but it's served up here in a kind of 4 or 5 out of 10 package. So I'll give it a 6 out of 10 overall, but with the proviso that if you are looking for something slick or are bothered by performance issues, you're definitely going to want to skip this one, whereas if you don't mind dealing with a bit or a lot of jank in exchange for some quirky and obscure retro styled arcade space blasting and some decent tunes, you may want to give it a shot. In other words, this is very much a case-by-case recommendation. I personally have been having some fun with it, and while I do wish it ran a lot better, it's not like an EA or Ubisoft game where you can just put things down to greed or laziness. This is just one guy struggling to get to grips with the Switch's weaknesses, and who knows, maybe it'll get patched some point down the line. Somewhat surprisingly, this did appear on Western eShops a couple of days after its Japanese release, so if you've played it, do let us know your thoughts, especially if you tried the PC release, because I'd be really interested to know how much these issues are Switch specific and how much they just come from the game itself. Anyway, thank you as ever for watching. See you next time. Cheers.